Our next guest left a cushy career on Wall Street at the ripe age of 25 to do something different. She created Acumen, a social venture fund that uses philanthropic capital to invest in entrepreneurs, which is the ultimate example of trying to do good while doing well. Please welcome to the stage the founder and CEO of Acumen, Jacqueline Novogratz. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Thank you. It actually is, it's really an honor to be in this group. The right people are so clearly in the room. And I was struck particularly by Ed this morning when he said that we're living in this age of so much anxiety and fear, in part because of how quickly the world has changed. And it reminded me of 1989, which was the year that I left Rwanda, where I had started the first microfinance institution, and if you can imagine, landed in Palo Alto. And I didn't understand when I first got here how tectonic plates were shifting so radically. It was a month later when we had the big earthquake in San Francisco, for those of you who remember. And then a few weeks after that, the Berlin Wall fell. It was the end of communism, end of history. Capitalism had won. That same fall, Steve Jobs spoke to my class, found his wife, and told us that the personal computer would be as important as the telephone. And yet, when I think back to that year in business school, nobody had a cell phone. Only the wealthy students owned heavy laptop computers. In our ethics class, we were taught the Bible of Milton Friedman, that our fiduciary and ethical responsibility was to the shareholder. And though we knew that globalization in some form was coming, the only international business case that we had was around Japan, which was clearly going to rule the world. And so when you think that so many of us in this room really have grown up against that global backdrop, it was a technological revolution, and it did change the world. When you look at hundreds of millions of people taken out of extreme poverty. 7 billion people on the planet own cell phones. There are more cell phones, in fact, than human beings. And yet those same tectonic shifts, unbridled capitalism, the rise of technology, you know it better than anybody, have also created a new earthquake moving across the world in terms of we are more unequal, we are more unsustainable, and we are certainly more untrusting of one another. I've been thinking about these issues really my entire adult life, that if the last 30 years were about a technological revolution, what we need right now in the next chapter is a moral revolution, a whole new definition of how we interact not only locally but globally. And we're in the midst of it, but it is so uncomfortable moving through that transition. I started Acumen in 2001 when 9/11 happened. And the idea was to use investment as a means, the tools of business, investing long-term patient capital in entrepreneurs that were going where markets and aid had failed the poor, to see if we might be able to solve some of our toughest problems. We were taking bets on individuals in healthcare, in energy, in housing, in agriculture and education, in Africa, Asia, Latin America, the United States. And it's been an extraordinary ride. As Alan said, we've invested about over $100 million, but we've brought services to over 270 million people. So we've seen the potential to disrupt from the edges. Probably more important, we've learned where markets work, and we've learned where markets fail, particularly low-income people around the world. We've learned how to immerse, to get close to the customers that our companies serve. And importantly, if I look at the companies that we've helped build over these last 17 years, we've seen a dividing line between those that succeed and those that fail. And like Ed, could talk for hours about the technical, the currency conversions, all of that, but it really comes down to one word, and that's character. Those entrepreneurs that build companies that disrupt systems have the character that enables them to fight the bureaucracy and the corruption, that enables them to partner in super innovative, long-term, gritty ways that has the moral imagination for them to recognize the world that they are in, but build a different reality. The ones that win have won in really big ways. We invested in these guys. They had 9 ambulances today in India. Today, they run about 3,500 ambulances, 8,000 employees. They took 4 million people to hospital last year. They have redefined emergency health delivery. 2 unsuspecting young guys out of Chicago who'd never seen a chicken in their lives show up in Ethiopia, see that there's a protein deficiency, decide that they're going to create a company called Ethio Chicken. And today, that company injects about $250 million into the economy. 71% of the people that make use of their services, smallholder farmers, make under $3 a day. And recently, the government credited them because they partner with government for reducing malnutrition in one region by 11%. And then coming back to my alma mater, 2 guys out of Stanford with a solar lantern and a dream to eradicate kerosene came to us in 2007. That company today, with the help of some of you in this room, has brought light and increasingly electricity to over 80 million people across the world. In Kenya, 70% of the country recognizes their brand. So we've learned a lot about betting on the right entrepreneurs at the edges. How do you bring them into the center? But what's been on my mind now, which is what's on so many of your minds, is how do we find more of them? How do we actually inculcate in our companies and in our entrepreneurs the values, the habits of moral entrepreneurship, moral leadership? I already mentioned this word, but I want to just talk about 3 of the main themes. One is the moral imagination. Mark mentioned empathy as something that we start with, and all of our customer and all of our employees should. I would agree. We have to build in ourselves the ability to put ourselves in other people's shoes, but empathy isn't enough. In a way, empathy allows power dynamics to remain intact. We don't really have to change if we feel another person's pain. The moral imagination starts with empathy and then goes beyond that. It imagines the systemic change that needs to happen so that others have the same freedoms that we have. What's been thrilling of late, now that we have so many tools and so much transparency, is we're starting to see entrepreneurs around the world that are displaying that kind of moral imagination. Just take one industry like chocolate, one of my favorites since I'm a chocoholic. And yet, it was only when we started investing in chocolate that we started to understand how complicated this industry is. It's a $100 billion industry, but it pretty much is dependent on 5 million smallholder families to grow the cocoa beans, 90% of whom make under $2 a day. Most of those farmers, the average age is 58. So they know that they are not in this for the long term, not at the wages that they are earning, and their children definitely know. So this is not only an injustice, this is bad for business. This is bad for the economy. And if you think about Asia and the demand that's growing for chocolate, we've got to solve this problem. What's been fascinating, as I said, is in Latin America particularly, young entrepreneurs have decided that they're going to imagine a whole new way of doing business. Because historically, we looked at global commodities pricing, and that's how we decided what we would pay the farmers. Fair trade did a little bit better by building in a small margin. These guys feel that fair trade is so 20th century. They are instead focused on what the costs of production are to the farmers. Then they make the whole supply chain transparent to them. Most of those farmers now have smartphones. And then they negotiate a price that's often 3 to 4 times what they used to be making. Price fixing as well, so that they get stability, which is more valuable to the farmers than income spikes. And we're not only seeing a community of trust being built, not easy to do, but we're seeing much more quality cocoa beans being delivered to companies like artisanal company here in San Francisco, Dandelion, but also Valrhona. Big buyers are starting to recognize that this may be the future. That's Latin America. If you look at West Africa, however, you still have a situation where along the supply chain, we have many farmers that are working in indentured servitude. The companies know this, and they want to do something about it. And so by partnering with organizations like ours, with the cocoa producers, we're starting to ask the questions of what can we learn from each other at the edges and bring it in so that we can all change. That takes that next skill, which is partnering. Partnering in real ways is hard. I really appreciated Maria and Garrett and Byron in the last panel talking about what it means. We've had a lot of experience partnering with corporations because I think you all agree that small is beautiful, but scale is critical if we're going to solve these problems. And so for our companies to actually hit the kind of scale we need, they either partner with companies or they partner with government. And so we've been learning what that actually means. And we've seen good partnerships and bad partnerships. I just want to call out Bain because I think it's an example that the last panel was talking about. Manny's here. There's Manny. That what we've learned in working with Bain is that, number one, it's a long-term relationship. We've been working together for 8 years. There's two, they embed. There's hardly a week that goes by when I don't see a senior partner in one of our offices. 3, there's a commitment to speak the truth to each other, to over-communicate, and to share our failures and what we learn. And 4, and finally, and I thought about this as I was listening to the last panel, Maria talked about apprenticeship. In a way, this is a reverse apprenticeship, because one of the things they do in the 52,000 hours of consulting they've given to us, fully pro bono, is embed some of their young leaders in our companies. And so they're in externships for 3 to 6 months, whether it's in Ethiopia or post-conflict Colombia. And when those young people come back, not only have they helped transform those companies, but they're bringing a different level of understanding the supply chains in which the large corporations are working. They're bringing a much different understanding of the world around them, and it makes them better leaders. And so there's a decision from Bain's perspective and an openness to changing, just as we are open to change. And I think that's so key. And then the third, which I also believe deeply is connected to partnership, and it's in so many of the conversations that we've already had today, is that when we think about moral leadership and the kind of skills we need to build, holding the contradictions, which we are not very good at right now. But right now, we're so divided that we're speaking to one another from the polarities. I win, you lose. I make profits, you focus on sustainability. You're all in this room because you are adept at moving into the center. And I think one of the most important skills that we need to develop is just this one, that even if you seem to be at the polar opposite of me, that I can find a truth or even a partial truth in what you say, and I can move toward you. How do we model that for all of the people around us, and how do we build solutions based on that? I love the poet Rumi, who says that beyond right doing and wrongdoing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. Beyond right doing and wrongdoing. We brought together a group of Indian and Pakistani entrepreneurs to have a conversation about Kashmir, not an easy conversation, on Skype, because we couldn't bring them together physically. And the conversation was indeed uncomfortable, difficult, but the fellows, the young people, were so excited by it that one of the Indian fellows put a screenshot of it on Facebook. And as you can predict, within minutes, he was deluged with hatred by many of his so-called friends. Things got worse when he went home. And his mother and father took him aside and they said, you know, it was bad enough that you decided to become an entrepreneur. Now you're consorting with the enemy. So you need to make a choice. Are you with us or are you with them? And so he called me and he said, Jacqueline, is it possible to be an Indian patriot and a global citizen? That question, can we be a patriot and a global citizen, is one of the most important questions of our generation. You all live it every day. And yet we're hearing rhetoric that it's one or it's the other. How do we stand as the best patriots with the responsibility to our neighbors, with the responsibility to solving our problems, whether in the for-profit or the nonprofit or government? And how do we also recognize our responsibility to bring the best of ourselves to the rest of the world? We have to be citizens, patriots, and global citizens. I have gotten so obsessed with the character of the entrepreneurs in which we have invested, and the fellows that we have supported, about thousands now strong around the world, that we've made a commitment where I'm going to spend a lot of my time, which is to build a global university for moral leadership, where we identify some of the best talent across race, class, ethnicity, nationality, tribe. And we not only link them, inspire them, support them, but give them the soft and the hard skills of what we think it takes to solve some of these problems, so at the very least they can model for one another and the world how we build a community based on shared values and not our individual tribes. It's hard to give a roadmap to that, and sometimes I wish I were back in 1989 where I had my playbook, shareholder wealth maximization. What do you say? And so since we can't give a how-to guide, we decided that we would build a moral compass. It's ours, it's aspirational, we try to live up to it. It's been fascinating to see young people around the world repeating the language back to us. And if you indulge me, I thought I might read it to you. Oops. It starts by standing with the poor, listening to voices unheard and recognizing potential where others see despair. It demands investing as a means, not an end, daring to go where markets have failed and aid has fallen short. It makes capital work for us, not control us. It thrives on moral imagination, the humility to see the world as it is, the audacity to imagine what it could be. It's having the ambition to learn at the edge, the wisdom to admit failure, and the courage to start again. It requires patience and kindness, resilience and grit, a hard-edged hope. It's leadership that rejects complacency, breaks through bureaucracy, challenges corruption, doing what's right, not what's easy. It's the radical idea of creating hope in a cynical world, changing the way the world tackles poverty, and building a world based on dignity. For us, it all comes down to dignity. One of the great privileges of my life and my work is not only do I get to work with these extraordinary entrepreneurs and their companies, but even more importantly, I get to know the customers, whether they are in the slums of Karachi or rural Africa or right here in San Francisco. And I'm reminded every time I meet with our customers that they yearn for the same things I yearn for, and that they provide me so many freedoms that I take for granted because they're the ones that grow our food, make our clothing, provide our services. And I want them to have those freedoms that we take for granted. In this moment of so much division, we would do well to remember the wisdom of Martin Luther King, who said that power without love is reckless and sentimental. I mean, power without love is reckless and abusive, and that love without power is anemic and sentimental. All of you are trying to navigate a razor's edge. But in this time of so much division, that we could all move forward holding power and love to show the world the definition of globalization that is not based simply on commerce, but on our shared humanity, on the best of us. Because in 35 years of doing this work, if I had learned one thing, it is that we do not get dignity as a human species until every one of us has dignity. Thank you.